Carrying on with looking at the kingdom of God and the parables of the kingdom. Looking at Luke 14:25. Jesus is calling his first disciples, but he's also challenging the crowds to follow him. It's under the setting of follow me, if you like. Be one of my disciples. Come into the kingdom. Be a kingdom person. And then he produces these two parables, which are very interesting, and which I have to say I've never preached on before. Shame, you say. Once when large crowds of people were going along with Jesus, he turned to them and said to them, "Whoever comes to me cannot be my disciple unless he loves me more than he loves his father and his mother, his wife and his children, his brothers and his sisters, and himself as well. Whoever does not carry his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple." If one of you is planning to build a tower, he sits down first and works out what it will cost, to see if he has enough money to finish the job. If he doesn't, he will not be able to finish the tower after laying the foundation, and all who see what happened will laugh at him. "This man began to build but can't finish the job," they will say. And if a king goes out with 10,000 men to fight another king who comes against him with 20,000 men, he will sit down first and decide if he is strong enough to face that other king. If he isn't, he will send messengers to meet the other king to ask for terms of peace while he is still a long way off. In the same way, concluded Jesus, none of you can be my disciple unless he gives up everything he has. So Jesus is challenging people as he challenges us to be his disciples and to follow him and to be kingdom people. And as with us, I think there is a degree of inspiration and enthusiasm. It is a great thing to feel that you are called by Jesus when you might not have been called by Jesus. It's a great thing to feel that you can have a part of the kingdom of God, that you can be part of the kingdom. This is a great thing. What if you did not? What if we'd not been called? What if we had not been chosen? And so, and when we see what Jesus is leading them towards, and the way he's talking about the new kingdom, the new world, a new way, clearly people like many of them, and I hope that many of us, are inspired by this. I want part of this. I want to be part of the action. I want to do this. I want to do that. It's good stuff. We want to be in on this. They were saying this. And then Jesus begins to warn them. And he says, I want to warn you that unless you're able to, and he gives us a whole list. In fact, in the previous chapter, we've got more of the various things you need to take into account if you were going to follow him. And the gist of it is, you're really going to have to make this the number one priority. You're going to have to set aside all the other things and all to come second, third, fourth, whatever it is, if you're going to follow me. You're going to have to take up your cross. That looks not easy. And so he challenges them with the cost, if you like. Don't put your hand up. Don't sign up if you don't know the cost. You know. Don't put your name down. Don't put your name down for the harvest supper until you know that it's not 25 quid. You know. These two little parables, though, he says, honestly, he said, anybody who is going to undertake anything which is worthwhile, perhaps risky, perhaps ambitious, perhaps something new, like discipleship, don't let's forget it's like that, over the years, he says, anybody would take stock, make, as one of the commentators says, a calculation of the costs before he starts. Otherwise, it isn't going to go well. He says, for instance, this man who's going to build a tower. Oh, let's build a tower. You can imagine the pictures now. If they'd had it then, they'd have had a computer-generated picture, wouldn't they, of the tower. You know, And he starts building a tower, and he gets this foundation, he's getting a bit up, and then run out of resources, run out of money, run out of everything. It goes, and you've got, what do we call it? A folly, half a tower. And he says this man is in a terrible state. No tower, no money, and all his friends think he's really silly. You don't want to be like that. You want to get halfway through and have to abandon it. What a disaster that is, he says. Or even worse from my point of view, what about a king who goes out there and... I remember seeing a cartoon once. There's this one bloke with a sort of like in old armour with a shield and a thing like this on one side of the cartoon. And there's this other king over there with his massive great army. And this bloke is shouting, "Oh yeah, you and whose army?" Oh, it's really, really good cartoon, I think. But this man says, Jesus says, look, what he's going out with 10,000 men to fight an army of 20,000 men. Does he not first make a strategic assessment? Let's see. And if it's yes, well, let's go out and give them a hiding. But otherwise, let us negotiate before we even start. They're very strong. But Jesus picks up at the end and says, again, if anybody wants to follow me, you must be prepared to give everything. In other words, you put these two things together, he's saying, if you're going to be a disciple of mine, you need to be prepared to give everything and make an assessment of the kind of costs. Or as somebody else says, good comment said here, take great risks with open eyes. Take great risks with open eyes. It's a great thing to feel that is a model of discipleship, that we are men and women called to take great risks with open eyes. Would I give everything? In spite of how it's looking. Because if you don't, well, it can come to a sticky end, as he says here. Now, this is important for us, I think, this morning. To start off with, if you are a Christian here and you are a Christian disciple and you are perhaps rightly thinking of the next move in your life, it doesn't have to be dramatic. It might be you're going to pray for somebody regularly, a person you haven't been praying for, or you're going to visit somebody you haven't visited, or perhaps within the church we're going to try something we haven't tried before, or you've got an idea, or you're trying to overcome some temptation in your life. Whatever it is a small project. Hear these words. Are you prepared to put your whole self into this, small as it might be, having taken stock of the probable costs? But for many of you who have been Christians for many years, you may be tired, weary and worn out, and the subtext is, I didn't know it was going to cost me this much. I'm halfway through the tower. Gosh. And it's listed. You know? And you think to yourself, did I ever actually make this assessment? Did I drift into Christianity because my parents were in it? Or like I did in a way, you know? And did I ever make a strategic assessment? And was I ever challenged to give my whole self? Well, now I am in the middle of all this. I've been a Christian for 25 years, or whatever it is, or more. And I'm thinking, this is wearisome, isn't it? I never signed up to give my all, and I never made a strategic assessment. It was going to be this hard. I meet people like that. Or I don't meet people like that because they've already left, you know. We become tired. It's time for perhaps... you will know that one of my favourite songs is I Have Decided to Follow Jesus, No Turning Back, No Turning Back. We play that sometimes, don't we? Yeah, it's a great song. And yet, I remember as a young adult sort of trumping across the Scottish Highlands with Christian Crusaders on a trek, and we used to sing that because it goes well to sort of tramping sort of song. And we would wander on into the next verse, you know. Though none go with me, still I will follow. Oh, yes. Great. Really? I suppose I was thinking there, well, they're all Christians here. I don't mind about the rest. This lot will do for me. The next verse, the cross before me, the world behind me. Oh, we sung that well. I don't think I really made a proper strategic assessment of the situation. Perhaps I should have. And I came from a Methodist tradition where you became a church member at 13 because you were 13, not because you gave everything to Jesus. And we're reaping the whirlwind of that, aren't we? Actually, I missed that. I became a Methodist member the week before I became a local preacher, because you had to be a member to be a local preacher. To be frank, I had to be a local preacher before I could be a minister. So it was a pretty good model. But you could have missed that. I could have missed that. And it might be a time looking at Jesus in this parable to say, I want to make a reassessment. I want to make a recommitment. I'm up for giving my all. And I'm up for looking at this in the face and saying, from here on, it'll be costly, but I will give it my all. Because otherwise, he says, don't do it. It's a very interesting thing to Jesus. I wouldn't have done that. I would have said, I want you to make an assessment of this and keep on following me and see how it goes. He says, don't start. That is a very radical thing. You're worse off. You're worse off. You'll be like the man who builds the tower and you're halfway through. You'll let Jesus down. You'll let yourself down. You know, it's half and half business. I got no tower and no money. That's great, isn't it? I joined the church. I got no time for my friends. I fell out with the church. I got no friends there. I got the worst of both worlds, sort of thing. I was just thinking, it's a stupid illustration really, but it just came to mind. When I was about 8 and I was in Sunday school, I had 2 Sunday school teachers who had been drafted in there because their parents were in the church. They didn't really want to do it. And I thought they were old. They were probably about 18. A girl and a boy who were trying to go out with one another. Anyway, they used to give us things to colour and draw and quizzes to do when they sat at the front and canoodled. And I thought to myself, this is the worst of both worlds. We'd be better off if they weren't here and we could do some proper Sunday school and learn about Jesus, and they'd be better off in the park. You get the worst of both worlds. You feel that sometimes, don't you? I put a lot of time into this, but not all my time, so it didn't come off, and I've wasted my time, you know. I've given up some of my resources, but we didn't have enough to do it. So now I'm poorer and we haven't done it, sort of thing. You know, I've just got a bit of prayer, but not a lot of prayer. So I've had a lot of prayer time, but no answers, sort of thing. One of the worst things I always find is getting into a canoe off of a quayside. You get one foot in the canoe. I don't go any further, do I? But you finish that with like that in Christianity, don't you? You know, 1 foot in and 1 foot out. Many of you are here, are like that. Because I'm like that. And Jesus says, don't start at all. I want to warn you, he says. Even worse, the king is going to get slaughtered by these 20,000 men. We can drift into spiritual disasters. We take on things we do not have the spiritual wherewithal to do. We get into to work with people who overwhelm us with their relationship and their problems and their crisis and infect us with their sin. And we are beaten people. And we think, how did I get into this? Well, I did not have a strategic assessment. I didn't know what it was going to cost. I just wandered into it, and now, what a mess. We thought it's like we've thought from time to time having a drop-in. It's about like let's do a drop-in centre for all the dropouts, you know, and all the dropouts come in and they drop out on us, and you can't cope. What are we going to do with all this drunk and drugs and smoking and filth? And we didn't know, we didn't understand, we didn't have the resources. That could be a disaster. And we finish up disillusioned and flattened, and where was God and all that sort of thing. Don't do it, Jesus says. You'd be better off not doing it. But he doesn't say that to discourage them. He doesn't really want any disciples. He wants them, and he wants us to succeed. He wants us to be kingdom people. He wants us to prevail. He wants us to be people who know the kingdom, who know his blessings, who know his grace. That's why he's warning you. It would be no good for me going on a Christian trek in Scotland. You finally get out the train after about 24 hours of travel and you trog up along there and I look up and say, gosh, I knew it was going to be a trek, but nobody told me there was going to be any mountains. You know, so you don't want to be there. Don't even get on the train. So I want to make an assessment and I want to be prepared to give my all because Jesus has called me. What is the point of me letting him down halfway through? What is the point of it all going pear-shaped? It's bad for me, but how does it look for him? What a great endeavour he calls us to. I don't want to finish halfway through. It was Francis Drake who said, "There must be a beginning to any great matter, but the continuing unto the end, until it be thoroughly finished, yields the true glory." And that's only Francis Drake who finished the bowls and finished the Armada. You know? But I'm also inspired to make this assessment because I'm called to follow Jesus, who does exactly the same thing. He's not one of these generals who leads the army from a nuclear bunker far away. We read in the New Testament that Jesus is fully aware of what he faces. He makes a strategic assessment and he says, I'm prepared to give everything. Everything. Jesus gives his all for you and me. He doesn't give a bit of preaching, a bit of healing, a bit of, sitting down for a meal. He gives his life. You know that. I know that. Knows it. I mean, it starts off, the Gospels practically start off with the temptations, where he has a set to with the devil. We know that what he is against is not just a few Pharisees and Romans and hangers-on, but spiritual forces. He's not just dying on the cross because Roman law finished up that he was crucified. He dies on the cross because he is dealing with the spiritual powers of a broken universe and a fallen world. He knows the strategic situation and he gives him whole self for it. And I think if we are conscious, and I'm always dropping off the edginess of this, if I'm conscious that Jesus has given me his entire life for me, has given everything for me, then would I do any less? Would I be half-hearted? He throws himself all into it and I'm standing on the bank and thinking, oh, sure about this? I want to make that assessment and I want to make the commitment to give him my all, day in and day out, because he gives me his all. But I want to say one final thing about Jesus in this that comes out of these parables. At this point in the Gospels, Jesus is assembling people. If you like, if we take the army thing, Jesus is assembling Christian warriors who will not give up, who will be with him in the fight that will prevail. And from a human point of view, you can see the more decent Christian followers he's got, the better. But it's not a human thing. He's not just one more sort of Jewish sort of terrorist trying to get rid of the Romans with a few hundred zealots. They tried that. However many human zealots you had, the Romans always prevailed. He's not like that. And certainly if he counted up 12 disciples that finished up as 11, it's not just we can go ahead with this because we've got lots of good Christian followers, lots of Christian soldiers. He wants us, but he makes a strategic judgment which is quite different to that, quite different to those few disciples, those human disciples. When it says in John 3:16 that God so loved the world that he sent his only son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. You have a surety there. That whoever, not that perhaps, not let's see how the battle goes. You can see that the strategic situation is a spiritual one and it is overwhelmingly in heaven's favour. You can see this at Christmas when the angel choir turn out. You can see what's really happening. You get a glimpse of this in the Transfiguration, don't you? And you get it when Jesus is just talking to Pilate. Pilate's been doing a strategic assessment. I could, because of the power I have under Caesar, I could set you free or I could execute you. Oh, yeah, really? Actually, there are all these legions of angels in the background here which you're not seeing, which are part of the strategic balance. In other words, Jesus at this point is going forward to death and to victory. because the strategic situation, having taken account of all that it will cost, is that God prevails and the victory is won. And so you and I are challenged to make an assessment of what we'll give and whether we will give our whole selves to this discipleship business. And we are challenged by a Lord Jesus that does the same thing and leads from the front. But we are also, I think, greatly encouraged that if we do, we are signing up to something where the kingdom wins. I like signing up to things where you win. Not because I win, but because he wins. That we are on, as it says in another chorus, on the victory side. And you can see this in things like the Old Testament, where the lad with Elisha, you remember, where they are surrounded by this great army. And he says, oh master, he says, we are doomed because all this army is surrounding Dothan. And he says, open his eyes, Lord, that he should see. And he sees, and it is the mountainside is covered in chariots of fire. Well, you act differently then. I'm up for this then. Or in the New Testament, Paul, who has a strategic view, doesn't he? I have the authority, I have the education, I have the status to put all these people in jail, and we are going to do it. Things are on our side now. We have the momentum until he gets hit by the light and the voice, and he realizes he's got the whole thing wrong. Saul, Saul, I'm not dead, but you're on the ground, so let's start again, shall we? And he remembers that throughout his life when he's isolated, when all his friends desert him. Why? Because he can understand the strategic situation. He's still giving himself. He's still taking stock of what it will cost him. But for me to live is Christ, to die is gain. So these are great parables, really. And just think to yourself this morning as you come to communion, Lord, I'm a bit tired, or I'm a bit disillusioned, or I've got a new idea, or you're calling me to go on. Discipleship is something to your call to every day. It is a lifelong call, but it is renewed. You do not live today on yesterday's breathing. And say, I don't want to put my hand up in some superficial way because I like the song or because I was moved by some word or something or other. Lord, I'm aware that this is costly. I want to take stock like the man with the tower and the army. I don't want to just go half-hearted. You've called me. I want to be realistic, and I want to be prepared to give myself. You've led me. I'm inspired by the fact that you give yourself, having taken things into account. But I am also encouraged, and we can be encouraged as a church, that when everybody's going, oh, there's more of them than there are of us, and oh, look at the secular society, and look at this and that and that. Lord, open my eyes that I should see chariots of fire covering the mountain. Touch me with your Spirit, that I know that what I'm getting into following you ends well.